You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneur.network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
Welcome to the Christian Entrepreneurs Podcast, featuring Christian entrepreneurs to inspire and empower Christian business owners to walk strongly in their faith, while building a thriving business that honors Him in every way. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of the Christian Entrepreneurs Podcast, brought to you by the influencealliance.com, the business building community for change makers. And yes, I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, my guest today says, we serve a generous and loving God. He wants us to prosper, but He often calls us to take the first step. And joining me on today's show is Andrew Robison. Now, Andrew, he's the owner and the president of Petrus Development. Petrus Development is driven by the simple ideal: ministries with more money can accomplish more. Now, he is a lifelong Catholic, and he sees his work with Petrus Development as a way of living out his own call to holiness, evangelization, as well as service to the church. Now, he was raised in the Houston area, and he attended Texas A&M University, where he had a profound experience through the ministry at St. Mary's Catholic Center and discerned a call to live his faith in new ways. Now, as president, he focuses on recruiting excellent talent, building a client base, and developing strategies that are going to add value to current and future partners. Now, on today's show specifically, he's going to share, be willing to play the long game. There's a difference between being fearless and being reckless. And in fundraising, people need to give more than organizations need to receive. So let's welcome Andrew to the show. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about Petrus Development. You're the owner as well as the president. So tell us a little bit about your journey to, owning and starting up, obviously, Petrus Development. Take us back.
Sure. Well, before I do that, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. I think it's this is a wonderful ministry that you have to the church worldwide, globally, and I just appreciate you having me on. So it's an honor.
Oh, thank you.
So a little bit about Petrus Development. I am the owner and the president now, but I'm not the founder. It was founded back in 2005 by two gentlemen, Peter and John, both very biblical names. And Peter and John founded Petrus really because they were excellent fundraisers, and they saw ministries that struggled to offer the level of ministry that they could because they just didn't have the resources. And so Peter and John were convicted to really operate, to found and to start Petrus as a ministry to the church. So over the time, both of them moved on to other roles. Peter actually, in fact, left Petrus back in 2009 to go work in Brisbane. He took a role with the Diocese of Brisbane for about 3 years and spent time down there, and then moved back, and now he lives in Oklahoma City. John left to be with an apostolate. But anyways, they founded the company, did great work for a number of years. I started working part-time as a consultant back in 2012. Really enjoyed the work that I was doing. I was fundraising full-time for a medical school at the time, so it was kind of my connection back to the church and a way to practice my faith. And then in 2017, I was offered the chance to come on as president. Did that. Always wanted to be. I've been an entrepreneur for many years, started a couple of other businesses. And so this was a passion of mine, with the opportunity to come on as president and then ultimately as the owner at the end of 2019. So that's a little bit about my journey, and I'm thrilled to be able to work with ministries. We work mostly in the United States. We have a couple of Canadian clients. All of our clients are faith-based. They're not all Catholic, but they're all faith-based, and their ministries ranging everywhere from a priest and a parish secretary to a team of 20 or 30 on staff that are just trying to take the next step in fundraising and in ministry. So we get to do a lot of different things, work with a lot of different clients, and it's a fun, there's never a dull moment. Let's just say that.
Yeah. So just with that, with Petrus Development, what are some of the services? Because, and the reason I ask you to share that is because there may be some people that are working in different ministries that are really looking for the skill set and the expertise that I know you and your team can bring. So just give us some examples of some of the support that you offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a little bit of everything. We'll help you hire a fundraiser. We know that a lot of ministries, they want a good fundraiser. They don't know where to find one. They've never hired a fundraiser before. And so we help with that. That's kind of, that's a getting started type of service. If you're just at the front end and you need a good fundraiser. We also help to teach principles of fundraising. We are a teach to fish organization. The name of the company is Petrus. And I love that because Peter in the Bible is the rock that Christ builds the church on, but there's also a really great story about Peter as a fisherman. And so, we are a teach to fish organization. We don't come in and raise the money for you because we want to equip you and your team to be able to continue raising money after we're gone. And so we teach fundraising principles, everything from how to write a compelling newsletter to how to build a database. We coach people on how to go out and ask for money. A big question that we get is, how do I know if I'm asking somebody for the right amount? Well, there's no great way, but you build that relationship, you get to know them, and you build some strategy behind that, and you can be more successful in those invitations to give. We also do capital campaigns, feasibility studies. So really, all the above. There's no organization that's too small or too early in the stage of development that we would want to work with. And there's nobody that is so far along that we say, oh, we can't handle that. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah. What I love about what you've just shared, and, people, please reach out. We'll share towards the end of the show how you can get in contact with Andrew and his team there at Petrus, because, in business, we know that there's certain skills development. And if we don't have that as part of the team, we either hire someone to teach us. And I love the way that you teach people how to do that. You empower them rather than doing that for them, of course, and I love that it ties really much back to what it's driven by the simple idea. This is the Petrus Development, of course. Ministries with more money can accomplish more, and they can. If they've got more funding, more capital to draw on, the more that they can hire and do what they need to do. Yet the whole topic of raising money and money in itself, especially within the church, it's kind of iffy, isn't it? And it's a whole new kind of the mindset around that as well. So I love that you're bringing that into the, bringing that forward and helping people in that area. So let's talk about being willing to play the long game. Now, if you want to draw in, from the aspect of organizations and ministries that may be doing fundraising, please feel free to do that, because I know that really is drawing into your expertise. And I just feel that maybe the Lord has got some messages within that area, for that area as well. So what do we need to know about playing the long game?
So I'll talk about it from a fundraising standpoint. A lot of the clients that I work with, and not even the clients that we work with, a lot of ministries, they see a need, they have a need, and sometimes it's a dire need. Sometimes the roof is literally caving in, or they don't have enough staff to serve the clients or the parishioners or the members that they want to, and so there's a dire need. Sometimes it's just you have a leader or a priest who says, I can see an issue down the road, so maybe we need to get a head start on that with some fundraising. Whatever it is, the first thing that they often say is, if they've never done this fundraising before, all right, what do I need to do? Go find a bunch of rich people and ask them for money? Well, I'm not saying that don't do that, right? But that's a way to really start out of the gate with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy, but not a solid plan for how to continue that. And so a lot of what we teach organizations is how to play that long game. If you build the foundations at the beginning, then your fundraising will not only be successful, but it will be successful for a much longer time. And so that's the unglamorous things, like starting a database and investing in, getting the right addresses and emails in your database. That's about investing in a solid website that has the staff information and the times of your services, and, a link right on the front page for how to give. It's those types of things. It's creating your policies and procedures for how do you send a thank you note when somebody sends in a donation. It's those type of things that don't seem like they're right, but but they set you up for sustainability, which is a huge issue with regard to fundraising. A lot of people, they have somebody gets started and they say, well, I know my Uncle Joe sold a business last year. I'm going to go ask him for, a huge check and that'll get us started. Well, that may be part of your strategy to engage Uncle Joe. You want him to be passionate about the organization, of course. But if that's the only plan that you have, then when Uncle Joe says, yeah, I sold the business, but I paid out all that money in taxes, and I'm starting this other business, and I just don't have the resources that I would like to give to you. Well, then you're in a tough spot because you put all your eggs in that basket. So that's with regard to fundraising. I think just in life and in business as well, you want to position yourself. Everybody, so let's say you're working with an entrepreneur. I started a couple of businesses. One was I was a wedding DJ, which I love. That was a lot of fun until I realized that I liked Saturdays and I didn't like spending every Saturday working and, till all hours of the night. And I had a young family at the time. So but that was a business that I started. Then I went to work and my wife and I moved to Ohio. We took this job. We moved back to Texas. We took another job. And then I had this opportunity to move into Petrus full time. Well, I knew from much earlier in my career that that's what I wanted to do, is to start and run a successful business. But I didn't have the expertise. I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have that training in how to fundraise and how to coach and fundraise, or how to, whatever the business might be, to make the business successful. And so I built those skills through these positions that I was moving into and taking, and always trying to learn a little bit more, because I knew that eventually I would have an opportunity to either start a business or take over a business. And I was blessed with the opportunity in 2017 to come into Petrus in this role. Maybe that's not your journey, but if you're not thinking about what's my plan 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the road, then you're constantly chasing what's right in front of you. And maybe that's not the right plan, or that's not the right next step. I'm a woodworker, and I think I heard on your podcast your husband is a carpenter, right, Anne-Marie? Is that yeah? So I don't do it well enough to make a career out of it, but I dabble. I have a workshop and I love building things. And the first thing that I have to do, though, and I've learned this the hard way, is look at my plans, figure out what materials I need, not just lumber, but also screws and glue and clamps and everything else, and create that plan, get all of my equipment in ready, so that whenever I actually start building, I have everything there. Otherwise, I get stalled out on a project. I don't have the right type of screw. And so then I say, all right, well, I'm going to go to the store in a little bit. And then things happen and I don't get to the store. And then it's a week, and then it's 2 weeks, and then it's a month, and then it's 3 months later. And my project is half done sitting there because I never went and got the right screws. So again, I think that's what I mean when I say play the long game, is be willing to look down the road. And sometimes that means making a move now that will position you for that. And sometimes that means not making a move. I've had a couple of jobs in my life that I wasn't thrilled at the moment about what was going on. And I thought, man, is now the right time to make a move? But I was still learning and I was still growing that skill set. And so it became an opportunity to stick with what I was doing, even if it was challenging, because I was learning and growing, because down the road, I knew there would be another opportunity to move on to. So
yeah, I love that. And something that, as you're sharing that, sometimes what happens is when we're not really playing the long game, what we tend to do is be moved by the ebbs and flows of the tide, or the challenges and the situations. And so, did the Lord really want me to do this or not? And when we come up with a challenge, even though it may be challenge after challenge, it's like, well, the Lord may not want this, but in actual fact, it is. And it's so much your calling that there is things and obstacles in your way to try and prevent you from continuing. And I love that you've said, do the long game, because you may need to shift. You may need to shift the path. You may need to try a different hammer, maybe, if it's not getting through, that nail in that wood. But play that long game. When you look back, I mean, I think hindsight is just a wonderful teacher. Is there something that really stands out as you reflect back over your career, thinking about the long game? What is one insight that you've learned across that? It maybe is something, sometimes we learn a lesson and it's repeated over and over, and it just emphasizes that is again, that's held me in really good stead. Anything like that stand out for you as you look back over your life and career?
So one thing that I've tried to do, and I didn't really become mindful of this until I would say, look back on my career. I've only been doing this for 15 years out of college. But about, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, it kind of came to me that I really don't ever want to intentionally or even accidentally burn any bridges. Right. So much of what we do is relationship based. In fundraising, it's relationship based. You have to get to know your donors. You have to be authentic and build those relationships. And ultimately, that leads to being successful in raising money. In business and in life, it's all about relationships as well. And so there have been times in my life that I've had a supervisor or, a coworker or somebody else that I think, gosh, I can't wait to get out of here and I can shake the dust of that person out of my life. You're right. And then I think I've realized as I've kind of continued to move through, work and through careers or through positions that's never, that's not what God calls us to do. Right. That's not, God doesn't say use people and then when you're done using them, cast them aside. No, he says love people. He even says love your enemies, but he says love people, invest in those relationships, be there for people, show kindness and virtue to people, and that kindness and virtue will be shown back to you. And so I think that's something that I've learned. Not that I had any incidents where I necessarily broke that rule, but it just occurred to me that I never want to be in a position where I burned a bridge and I don't have that relationship that I can go back on and that I can, because you never know, right? Especially if, going back to this point of playing the long game, you never know when somebody from your past is going to come back and say, hey, Andrew, I know we haven't spoken in a long time, but I've got this opportunity. Somebody, I'm not the right fit for it. Maybe you're not either, but I'd love for you to meet this person. I'd love for you to hear about this opportunity. And you just never know where those opportunities are going to come from and where those relationships are going to go.
Yeah. As you're sharing that, I mean, there's so many golden nuggets. I mean, whether we're in fundraising, whether we're in ministry or in our business, as ministry, or even if we're a church, when you're saying around investing in your relationships, in instance of donors, could be customers, could be your parishioners, if you're not continuously building those relationships and empowering them, creating that united vision and onboarding new people, you will end up burning out the donors. You will end up burning out your team if you keep relying on the same people and you're not investing into them and growing your team. And similarly, in a church environment, you can do the same to your parishioners, who are the same ones that keep saying yes and yes all the time. So to create that culture, because I think when you do, like the donors, if you tell such a unique and inspiring mission statement and vision of how whatever you're doing, the project or whatever, how that is going to impact the lives of, people get behind it, don't they? Because they want to become part of that vision. They want to become part of that story, and knowing that the money, and sometimes it can be in kind, some is the support that people give of their time. When they invest in that, they can see what the outcome is, and that just aligns with who they are. And so you often then will get people who will often come out of the woodwork and say, I'd love to be a part of that. When you're consistently investing in that relationship and that storytelling, have you found that to be true too when you're working across the board?
100%. You're absolutely right, Anne-Marie. And you kind of led into another point, which is about, if you really are playing the long game and you're really building those foundations, you have to constantly be investing in building your pipeline and building your funnel. And so, this is key in fundraising. And this is where I go back to that earlier story about, if I think I said Uncle Joe, maybe I said Uncle Joe. If your whole development strategy is to go ask Uncle Joe, but you're not cultivating new donors, new people into your life, maybe Uncle Joe will fund you, but he's not going to fund you forever. And so who else are you investing in? Who else are you building relationships with? And so in a lot of the work that we do, that's why we really want to, from the standpoint of Petrus, we really want to teach both the principles to our clients and to ministries that want to grow. Not just about coaching how to make the right ask to a donor, how to build that relationship and steward them along, but also what are the foundational things that you need to be doing to build that pipeline of future donors. That there's when I was at St. Mary's Catholic Center at Texas A&M, it was my first job out of college, we started a really great program called a class gift program. And
Yeah.
it was we asked seniors before they graduated who had been involved in the ministry to make a pledge. And they gave $1,000 pledge, paid that with $20 a month for 50 months, right? So that's $20 a month times 50 is $1,000. And we thought if we could get 25 of these seniors together to pledge this, that'd be $25,000. And so it was successful, and it kind of became this tradition now. Well, we started that back in 2005. They still do the class gift program in 2020, 2021. And you look back at all of the donors that now have kind of moved up in the ranks of giving, so to speak. They started at $20 and they moved it up to $50 a month. Then they started giving $100 a month. And now they're, making a $25,000 or $100,000 commitment to the new church campaign. It was all about building that pipeline, starting with the foundations and getting those donors involved early and showing them that they can make an impact. I think that was the other thing that we really wanted to reinforce is you're not just giving $20 that you're never going to see again. This $20 is actually really important, and it's making a huge impact. So again, to your point you just made, is that you have to be investing in building that pipeline that will ultimately move people from $20 a month to $100,000 or $1 million down the road because they have seen the good work that you've done with their gifts.
Yeah. We had a really good question that came up here from Bunjalang Warrior. It said, what about sheep and wolves clothing? One of the things I think when you're looking at, say, from a team point of view, and then I'd love your thoughts on this as well from your viewpoint, this is when we're talking about investing in people. There may be people that you find that evidently in your team and it may be a hire that you thought was going to be fantastic, but, in more closely working with that individual, you may see that they're not actually aligned with the organization's values and vision and so forth. And I think as a leader, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we've given them the right instructions and the right support to be able to deliver. We always need to, as a leader of our team, to be able to do that, to support them. But at the end of the day, there are just some people who are just not a good fit. And again, being able to have that confident conversation, and sometimes it's just agreeing that this is not the best opportunity and parting ways, not with any animosity or whatever. But I think when we bring that to the relationship and know that as a leader or as an individual, that when we take it that way, we know with hand on heart that we've done everything that we can, even to the point where we've parted that relationship. I mean, I'd love your thoughts on that, because there are some people who are like wolves in sheep's clothing, and we need to be able to be aware of that, to discern that, and to be able to deal with that, because that can impact the rest of the team as well. But love to see if you've got some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, sure. From the, I think that's a good question, and I think it's an important question to consider. I think with regard to building your team, we're a small organization. We have 14 on our staff, but many of them are part-time. Just like I said, I started with Petrus when I was working full-time at the medical school, and I started part-time consulting. Many of our consultants are that way. So we're still a very small team in terms of full-timers. And we had an opportunity this past year to bring somebody on who had great skill set, but just as the conversations went on, just wasn't a fit with our culture. Certainly nothing negative about that individual. Certainly not equating that person to a wolf in sheep's clothing, but just wasn't the right fit, right? It wasn't a cultural fit. And as tough as it was, because that was going to really help solve some issues that we had in terms of staffing, as much as it hurt, as the president, it was on me to say, I really want to move forward with this, but from a team perspective, we're a small team. Adding one person that's not a cultural fit can be devastating to us long term. And so I think that was just, I spent a lot of time in prayer. We discerned this, many conversations. Like I said, we struggled with this situation because this was a great individual, great skill set, and just wasn't culturally the right fit with us. So I think when you approach hiring and building your team with just that, with some of the principles that God calls us to, right? Discernment and trust and faith and belief and prayer, right? Like that's going to protect you from a lot of that from a team perspective. But then I think when you take the next step and say, yes, this person could help solve some problems for us, or could solve some needs, fill some gaps, but is that going to create other issues?
Yeah.
And if it's the case, then you have to be willing, in some ways you have to be courageous enough to say, I can't move forward with this knowing that. So I think that's from a team perspective. I think that the question also, though, may be directed to fundraisers who are disingenuous, right, in their approach to fundraising, and are able to, through their charisma, through their charm, through whatever that is, be able to secure funding, but then ultimately aren't using that in the right way, right? And from my standpoint as a fundraiser, this is what I've done for 15, 16 years. There's nothing that's more tragic than when I hear stories about fundraisers or ministries that sort of break that code of trust with their donors. And in terms of how to protect against that, I mean, on the one hand, people that are not passionate about this and are not doing this in the right way, and that are not following the sort of steps in the plan, they're going to flame out, right? The market itself is going to force those people out, because donors are going to figure out this is not somebody, or this is not an organization that I want to support, right? So there's some just inherent protection from a nonprofit, from a fundraising, from a market perspective. But I think the other thing is that we as fundraisers, as a fundraising community, need to be willing to stand up, and when we see somebody or we see something that is happening that we know is not right, we need to be willing to stand up and call it out for what it is, and say, if it's in the faith-based world, say, this is not what this organization, what this individual is doing is not of Christ. It's not representing the church in a way that we feel that is obvious. And we need to be willing to stand up and be bold. So, So those are, I think that's a good question. And I think that those are the best answers that I can give in that regard.
Yeah, I love those. Great responses, and certainly agree with those. So let's talk about what would you say then is the difference between being fearless and then being reckless? What would you say?
Yeah. So one of my favorite Bible verses is Luke 5:4, when God tells Peter, I think it was Peter, to cast your nets out into the deep, and you will be rewarded. And we have the first part of that, cast your nets out into the deep, and that's my son is Luke, and so that's why we put that in his nursery. And the reason for that is because there's a need in all of our lives. God calls all of us, but especially those that are, in this context, entrepreneurs, those that are working, that are building ministries, building organizations. God calls us to be bold, and if we're not bold, then we're not going to succeed long term. So I think that we're all called to be bold. Now, I can say this because in my life I've had a couple of many near-death experiences. I've been in a plane crash. I've rolled two vehicles in the mountains, one in the snow and one off a dirt road. I hit a tree snowboarding. What else? There's probably two or three. I almost fell off a cliff rock climbing one time. There's a couple of incidents, right? And so I tell my wife that clearly God, I'm invincible. He made me invincible, which she doesn't like, because then my kids start claiming that they're invincible, and then they want to jump off the garage, and that's just trouble. But I know that what it means to be fearless and to be reckless, that there are consequences to being reckless. So I think that God calls us to be bold, but he also he gives us wisdom and prudence. One of the virtues that we have, one of the four cardinal virtues, temperance, prudence, justice, and charity. God calls us to be prudent and to be temperate and to make good and wise decisions. And, some of that is, youthful indiscretion, right? Like when I was, when I crashed my first car, when I rolled my first car, it was because I was 21 years old, driving too fast on a dirt road. I was going somewhere really important, but I was driving too fast, went off the side, rolled the car, and I learned my lesson. And so, that was an incident. That was an example of me being reckless, but that didn't ultimately help me because I didn't get where I needed to go, where God calls us to be fearless. And by that, I mean to be bold and to cast your nets out into the deep.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and that's right. I often say to people, the cat has 9 lives. That saying. Well, I think I've only got a couple left of that. You've kept a guardian angels very busy over your
Yes, absolutely. Certainly.
That's wonderful. Now, I do know that we've just got some short time left. And so in closing, I know that you wanted to share, and probably you may already mention something around this, but I think it's nice to close up. In fundraising, you say people need to give more than organizations need to receive. That's so important, isn't it? Particularly when it comes to fundraising, and actually even in business, when we're thinking about our clients, we really need to, from an organization's point of view, need to sow into our donors, sow into our teams and our clients. Yes?
Absolutely, 100%. And I'll tell you 2 short stories. One was with that class gift program. It was 2006. I was new to this. I had met this senior who was about to graduate, and she had been nominally involved. And I said, Annalisa, would you like to, I'd love to talk with you about this project. I explained it to her, and how the funds were going to be used to create an endowment that would provide long-term funding for the ministry. And she said, and I said, I know you haven't been very involved, but I'd like you to consider this. And she said, okay, first of all, I was involved in a sorority when I was at school here, and that was my life. Everything around my time, my schedule was controlled by the sorority. I just was so busy. Said, but every Sunday night I went to mass, and all of my friends knew, okay, Annalise is going to mass, so we had to do dinner later. We have to do whatever we're doing later after that. And she said that over 4 years, that became my witness to my friends, and that became very important to me. And also, I have a little sister who is going to be a student here next year. And my hope is that she'll be involved in the ministry as well. So if I can give, and you're telling me that this gift will make an impact, sign me up times 100. I am in. And so it was that incident that taught me a lot early on, that you never judge people. You never make decisions for somebody, right? Don't answer no on behalf of somebody else. And this is in fundraising and also in business. So that was an important lesson, but also it really taught me how important it was for Annalisa to make that gift, even though she had, seemingly very little reason, just based on her involvement. It was very important to her for those reasons. And then the second story, I'll tell you this very quickly, is the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. I think there's a hero of that story, and it's the little boy. And when the disciples go around and they come back and they say, we have this boy and he has, 2 fish and 5 loaves, or 5 loaves and 2 fish. Yeah, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Sorry. Yeah. So
actually, there were more than 5,000. I think the 5,000 were the men. Then there would have been women and children there too. So
the boy shares it. But if you think about it, just one point, what boy eats 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish by himself? He probably brought that food to feed his family. And here he was offering it to Christ to serve so many more. And Christ took that gift that he had, a lot of courage. I'm sure his sisters and his mom, and other people were like, what are you doing? Giving away our food. And here Christ took that and multiplied that in a way that it could never have accomplished what it did had he kept that fish. And so I think, those are 2 stories that I just love to tell, because they show the impact of what a gift can do, both in our lives and then also what God can do through our generosity.
Wonderful, wonderful stories. So, Andrew, I know that you had an opportunity to share about Petrus, and so people can certainly go back and watch the live stream or listen to the recording again. However, what's the best way for them to get in contact with Petrus, and perhaps even yourself too, if something that you've said today has really sparked something in them and they would like to connect? What's the best way?
So the best way is our website, petrusdevelopment.com. That's Petrus development.com. You can find all my contact information on there. We're on Facebook under Petrus Development, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of those channels. You can find Petrus. Personally, my username on most of those is Aggie Robison. A&M is I know that maybe you're not as familiar with the what A&M is and the craziness that goes along with our alumni base, our former students, but it's hard to get the Aggie out of somebody once they go through that experience. So
once they've been indoctrined also,
yeah, there you go. Aggie Robison. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, a couple of those places as well. So that's me. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a fun conversation to talk about business and fundraising, and it's just really encouraging from my standpoint to know that people like yourself are giving voice to Christian leaders to talk about how we can do this better and how we can honor God and honor Christ through our work. So thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And so I'd love to finish the show with a word of prayer, if that's all right, Andrew. So we'll just word of prayer. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to speak with Andrew today, find out more about Petrus Development and the work and the ministry that they're doing. Father, when we think about all of the different projects and all of the areas that we want to contribute, both in time and financially, we know that whether we're building a fundraising for a project or whether we're building a business, as Andrew so beautifully reminded us, we need to be mindful that we are in it for the long run, and that there are certain principles and planning and leaning into you and prayer and all of that, which we know to be true and so important, that we need to do, to be mindful of the leadership skills and the teams that we are developing, as well as the vision and the way forward. And so, Father, we just want to thank you for that. We want to just pray for Andrew and for his team at Petrus, for the clients that they're working with. We continue to bless all of the projects and the work that they're doing. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Andrew, for coming on the show. We've got a couple of comments there. And Bajalang Warrior was there as well. Thank you for being part of the show and contributing your comments as well. So once again, thanks again. And we'll catch you soon on the live stream. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks. God bless.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.